But there's been some stories sort of going around about how Donald Trump apparently personally offered David Lammy seconds of the dinner. So I don't know whether it went better than you thought, but Trump definitely does have a thing about he likes people to come and sort of kiss the ring and sort of say, I was wrong about you, which I'm sure both Starmer and Lammy did. So, Sam, the big news all anyone's talking about is someone's got a really big job. And I'm not talking about the president-elect Donald Trump. I'm talking about you.
It's true. I am leaving the lobby after more years than I care to admit to. And I'm going to work in Express HQ as an associate editor. So this is my last episode of The Division Bell. I'm very sad to say, but it's been a blast.
You're fleeing in fear because of all of our disagreements. Well, we're going to miss you a lot, but we're going to have the new political editor of The Express, Martin Brown, who I think we've had on before, haven't we?
Yeah, he's been on a couple of times. So he's an old hand and he will be able to guide you through what Express readers are thinking every week. And he will be here from next Thursday.
Well, there's another big job that I think we do need to talk about as well, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
I'm Lizzy Buchan, interim political editor of the Daily Mirror.
I'm Sam Lister, and for a few more days, I'm political editor at the Daily Express.
And this is The Division Bell.
Well, we've been talking about it for months and months, speculating who was going to take the White House. Would it be Donald Trump? Would it be Kamala Harris? We now finally have a result. And in the end, it was pretty clear cut. We thought it might end up being delayed for days, that there'd be, this would be thrashed out in the courts. But by the time I'd woken up at 6 a.m, it was pretty clear Donald Trump was the winner. So it's been kind of less dramatic in the end than we thought, but more clear cut, more easy, I think, to move on from. I think obviously the big fear was if it had been actually as close as pollsters had predicted, then that would obviously lead to real trouble in the country. But because it's been so decisive, I think that's actually probably, all to the good, regardless of whether you're pro-Trump or against him. At least it's been clear what the public wanted out there. So, but anyway, let's have a look. We polled our readers about who they would like to see in the White House. And for the Daily Express, Kamala Harris, 29%, Donald Trump, 71%. And for the Mirror, very, very close, actually. Kamala Harris, 55%, and Donald Trump, 45%. So overall, 51 for Kamala, 49 for Trump. Very, very close, I think. I'm surprised by the Mirror, were you?
Definitely. I mean, the Express result's pretty decisive,
clear,
isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I am surprised that it was quite that close. I mean, my impression had been from sort of messages we get from comments on stories that Trump's quite unpopular with our readers, but clearly not. Yeah. So yes, it was certainly, the knife edge result that people were predicting on the Mirror Politics Twitter. But yes, as you say, we're further on. It all happened much more quickly than we'd expected. We have both got colleagues out in the US who've been reporting on the ground, and I think we've got some footage that we can have a look at that kind of gives you a sense of how it all unfolded. So my colleague Mikey Smith was at Howard University, Kamala Harris's alma mater, in DC for what was sort of expected to be her election night party, but obviously turned out to be a bit of a damp squib. So I think, why don't we have a look at that?
Well, hello from Washington, D.C. It is just about 1 o'clock in the morning here, which makes it about 6 in the morning where you are. And I am at Howard University, which is where Kamala Harris went to college. It's also where she chose to have her election night watch party. Although, as you could probably see behind me, if you're watching on video, there's been a lot more watching than partying going on this evening. We've just had the announcement on the stage that Kamala Harris isn't giving a speech tonight. One of her team came out, thanked everyone for coming, told them to come back tomorrow and to sort of go home, get some rest, don't panic, as the remainder of the results are coming in. The gentleman who spoke on the stage said that she would be speaking not just to us but to the nation from here tomorrow. Now, it's important to say that at this point, at 1 a.m, it is possible for Kamala Harris to win the election. There are routes to victory, but they are slim and they are dwindling. She needs everything to go in her favour. There are areas where she is winning, where she is not winning enough to make up for the areas where she is not. And I think as people go home to get some rest, they're going to be starting to think, after the big rush of the election campaign, they're going to start thinking about what a Donald Trump presidency, a second Donald Trump presidency with an older, angrier Donald Trump, is going to mean for them and for their families and for the world.
So from that clip, you can see that Mikey was at that party in the early hours of the morning on Wednesday. So it kind of gives us a sense of how clear it was already that you can see behind him the sort of decimated, apocalyptic scene of the kind of deserted rally. And it's interesting, yes, that they sort of they clearly called it quite early, and she disappeared.
She did. She just went to ground. There was no message on Twitter. There was no speech. Obviously, we heard from Mikey. She was supposed to be there, but they basically sent everybody home. It looked a pretty depressing sight. It actually reminded me of the Brexit referendum night, where when I was working on a newswire, I'd been sent to the Remain party, and when I arrived, everybody was all very excited, and then very soon the mood turned very miserable, and then people left far earlier than they were expected to be leaving. So you can kind of, you just get the mood, don't you? People who they're all excited, they all think, yeah, this is it, we're in the winning camp, and then the mood suddenly turns and everyone just disappears. It was very kind of depressing. But yeah, it was, as Mikey said, it was, people have been told, go home, there's nothing to see here, and they did. But anyway, we've got our colleague Zach Garner-Perkis out in Wisconsin, and he was at a Republican election night party. So let's hear from him.
Trump has a vision, right? To make America strong again, to make America safe again. Like, I want to be able to buy a house, when I'm 26, start a family. And I didn't think that's possible this politics.
Yeah. Is it economy? Is that the thing that's really...
One of the immigration. Immigration is the biggest, because everything ties back to it. Like the economy, just like being able to have like that culture and the same American identity. It all just stems back to immigration and like keeping the country how it is.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, actually, that they're the same kind of issues that we are dealing with in British politics, the economy and immigration. It is a universal kind of they're both universal dominating factors in Western politics, really, at the moment. I think what I thought was interesting was, see, these are young people and they want to build a future, and they're picking the person they think will give them that best chance of that. And I heard a British person who lives in America talking about what Brits over here do not understand about American politics and why people might have chosen Trump. And she said that it's about the economy, and you don't understand in Britain how fundamental to everything that is in America, because there is no safety net. There's no real effective welfare state. The medical provision, as we know, is incredibly basic if you are poor.
Or incredibly expensive.
Yes, exactly. And so the economy, when you are facing a cost of living crisis, inflation's gone up, and you're struggling to make ends meet, there is nobody to catch you if you're falling. And so everything is about who will be the best person for the to make us be able to make ends meet, really. And I think that is something perhaps it's very hard to understand American politics from so far away. People just see Donald Trump, and obviously there's a certain kind of British approach to Donald Trump that I just don't think many people get why people over there are so enamoured by him. But I think that really times felt good under him, and whether rightly or wrongly, whether you think it was down to Trump himself or not, times felt better for people under Trump, and they didn't under Biden, and that, I think, is the top and bottom of it, really.
Yeah, I think that's right, that Kamala Harris has fallen victim, whether this is her fault or not, to the fact that she's so closely tied to Joe Biden.
Yeah.
obviously she didn't have very long to campaign, and she came in and there was this sort of big surge, this honeymoon period where suddenly it looked like things were turning around, but then she failed to stabilise that, and suddenly all of the kind of issues that had been bubbling under the surface, the disquiet, the resentment over the Democrats' record under Joe Biden, suddenly all started coming up again. And the economy is the thing, isn't it? And I think whether, Donald Trump benefited in some ways from the fact that obviously he wasn't president during this kind of post-pandemic period where countries, including the UK, have seen huge surges in inflation, interest rates that have really hit working people, put mortgage rates up, all of that sort of thing. And people are really fed up and they're punishing the leaders that were in charge during that period. And I think Kamala Harris, I was really struck with the fact that she did an interview, I think it was in October, on a talk show where somebody asked her, what would you have done differently? And she really struggled to answer that question because she's so closely tied to him. And so the Trump campaign were obviously able to sort of say, and I think they did do a big ad campaign saying, everything that's terrible in your life, she won't change any of it. Yeah. And that change message always resonates in some ways, doesn't it, when people are fed up?
Yeah. And I think, but also, like, if you listen to some of Donald Trump's speeches during this, when he goes, when he's holding a rally, and I think I'm sure he said he's done something like 900 in his, not just this time, but I think if you add in the last time round as well, I think he does. Some of them are like 2 or 3 hours long. I mean, I just can't imagine in the UK that anybody would ever listen to a politician for 2 hours.
No way.
I mean, you're lucky to get anybody to pay attention for 10 minutes, really. But that is like testament to his, whatever it is that makes him him. I think he has an ability to talk in this very unusual, folksy, often comedic way that his supporters just love, whereas Kamala's just so polished and professional. And actually, at this time in the world, people are turning away from that. They're looking for often somebody who feels a bit more authentic and less kind of focus group managed, less PR polished. They're looking for somebody a bit more authentically them, I suppose. And he manages to give them what they want, and that's quite a powerful tool, really.
But it is amazing that he's managed to do that. I mean, on a greater scale than Boris Johnson did in this country. He manages to present himself as being the working man, whereas in fact, he's exceptionally rich. Yeah. He says he's like an expert on making deals, but he's actually not that successful. He's lost loads of money, but he's managed to present himself as being sort of the voice, the outsider, all of this stuff, and it's kind of amazing that that's worked, but it has, and people buy it, they believe it, they think he's plain speaking, that he, but I did think this time around that you're right about the way he speaks, and he's funny and all of that, and he has a very good eye for a nickname that it can be really cutting, and, Sleepy Joe and all of that really do work. But this time around, he had become so incoherent as well. Like, there was one rally where he sort of swayed to the music for ages because he was really enjoying himself. And I remember watching a press conference, I think in September, when we were on a trip to New York with the Prime Minister. It was an hour and 15 minutes or something. I just couldn't tell you what he was talking about. And all the American journalists were just on their phones sort of waiting for him to end, and then so they could ask their questions. Yeah. So it is amazing as well that hasn't turned people off. It seems to have worked. Yeah. And I don't know whether it's a thing of a mixture of the kind of the baggage that the Democrats have after being the incumbents, and some of this kind of polish of Kamala Harris that hasn't worked. But in some ways, his sort of broad brush way of talking, his kind of supersized policies of I'm going to build a mega wall and deport everyone and fix the economy immediately, that sort of works in a way for people that actually they just want big ideas. And it doesn't really matter that he hasn't given any detail. They're just like, this sounds good, let's have more of that. Yeah.
I think we do have to look at the international implications, though. I mean, I do think President Zelensky, he tweeted after it became clear that Donald Trump was the new president, and he, I mean, it was quite a long and detailed message, but it was very enthusiastic and welcoming the new president and how they'd had this long talk about his victory plan for Ukraine. And obviously he will be absolutely acutely aware that, you know, everything kind of rests on Donald Trump, the future of Ukraine and its ability to fight back Russian aggression entirely depends on what Donald Trump does next. And so the whole world will be watching that.
Yeah, there are so many things in play here because he's so unpredictable, totally capricious in what he wants to do. He sort of says things like he wants to end all wars and he wants to get this deal with Putin, but that probably means ceding Ukrainian territory. If the US pulls its support for Ukraine, that's a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
You know, it's not really clear whether they would be able to continue to resist Russia without the support that they've had from the US. Yeah. And so that is something that I think is top of the priority list for the UK in terms of trying to make sure that use whatever powers that we have, persuasion, to try and make him stay on message there. But there's also the Middle East, there's China, he could pull the US out of NATO. It is slightly terrifying when you think how much is hinging on a whim that he might have one day. And, you know, he might wake up in the middle of the night and decide he's suddenly going to pull the US out of NATO or fire rockets somewhere or do whatever, ring up Putin and say, you know what, hands up, you can have Ukraine. That's the kind of thing that we're dealing with now.
But that said, when he was president last time, number 45, I think last time, and now he's 47, there was always this suggestion that he might pull the US out of NATO. And obviously he didn't. And that was down to Theresa May. She actually handled that really well. I don't think she gets enough credit for that, actually. But
that's probably fair.
Yeah, but actually, what he did was make the rest of NATO pay up. You know, the whole problem has been that the US has put in a far greater share proportionally than the rest of NATO, and he wanted to shake them up a bit, I think, and say, look, you can't just kind of ride on the backs of America forever. You all have to do your bit too. And that actually worked because defence spending across the rest of NATO went up as a result of that. So I think, you know, there was this panic last time when he pulled out of NATO. Well, he didn't, and he got people to pay up extra cash. So maybe that will happen again this time. You know, I don't think it's a kind of done deal that he will withdraw. And so, you know, and also his big thing is always there have never been any wars under, you know, no war started under my presidency, and you know that is an actual true fact
for once.
True fact, you know.
Yeah.
But the implications for Britain too are really interesting. Keir Starmer was straight out the blocks after it became clear that Donald Trump was the new president to congratulate him. They had a dinner earlier this year that went really well. Donald Trump said some lovely things about him afterwards, and that's all very positive. But obviously there is this whole back catalogue of comments made by Keir Starmer, his Foreign Secretary David Lammy, Health Secretary Wes Streeting, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, who have said very, very robust, shall we put it, robust things about Donald Trump in the past. And they said that from the safety of opposition. And they said these things in 2016, 2017, often on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, often from the safety of knowing that it was unlikely they were going to get back into power anytime soon and that Donald Trump might be out. And obviously now they're dealing with the reality of having to deal with a president that they, as a collective, you know, as a party, collectively on their front bench, have really gone for relentlessly over the years. I mean, David Lammy called him a neo-Nazi sympathiser.
It was a threat to the world order.
Yeah. And actually Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, he, on this announcement of him returning to the White Office, has been really very less than complimentary about it. So
they have previous though, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They have been fighting for years.
Nearly 10 years or something like that.
It is a proper good ruckus, that one, actually. It's quite interesting to observe. But, you know, this is a Labour Party with difficult issues, I think, with Donald Trump. And they are trying to smooth that over. But, we know this is a man who can hold a grudge.
Yeah, I think they're in a bit of a tight spot, as a lot of world leaders are, because Donald Trump is not your typical politician. He isn't polished at all. And he also says a lot of things that a lot of people find extremely offensive. The way he talks about migrants, some of the comments he's made on a number of issues are really, really offensive. And he is a convicted criminal. He has, he was accused of inciting his supporters to violence at the last election. So, I think that's really hard for politicians to grapple with, because their voters are looking at this and saying, how can you accept a man who speaks like this? Theresa May came up against this with some of the comments that he'd made about women that she was then confronted about. And she obviously didn't agree with it, but she has to do business with him. So it's really difficult. But what I think is quite interesting, particularly with David Lammy, is he has said some really punchy stuff about Donald Trump. But he went to this dinner, and I was on that trip to the UN in New York, and we'd been chasing them all weekend. Oh, you're going to get this meeting? Oh, you're going to get this meeting? And eventually they said, yeah, they're doing this dinner in Trump Tower. Donald Trump, Keir Starmer and David Lammy, and that's pretty much it. And they didn't really brief anything about it at the time, apart from that it had gone well. And I think the fact that they haven't really talked about it probably shows that they think it did go well, and they're trying to be really careful about it. But there's been some stories sort of going around about how Donald Trump apparently personally offered David Lammy seconds of the dinner. So I don't know whether it went better than you thought, but Trump definitely does have a thing about, he likes people to come and sort of kiss the ring and sort of say, I was wrong about you, which I'm sure both Starmer and Lammy did. There is a way forward. Downing Street were asked, what's David Lammy's future? Will he be Foreign Secretary for the whole of this Parliament? And said yes. So at least on the surface, it all seems to be going okay. But there is the kind of all that underlying baggage. And then the row during the election as well about the fact that Labour activists went out to campaign for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways, Trump will perhaps like the fact that Labour are in power, because he has them where he wants them, really. They have to really be kind of on bended knee to him for the rest of the Parliament, don't they? To make up, to atone for all their previous comments. Sins. Yeah, atone for their sins. They're always going to have to be overly nice, conciliatory, always making the effort, because they're very conscious that actually there are things that Donald Trump can and may decide to be angry about at a later date. Just because he's all right now doesn't mean he will have forgotten those comments. So I think it's difficult for them. They're going to have to always be making the effort.
I have to say, what I wouldn't give to be a fly on the wall for that dinner. Keir Starmer and Donald Trump are not the most natural bedfellows. No. So yeah, I would. But
they have one real asset in the British ambassador, Dame Karen Pierce, known for wearing feather boas. She's quite a colourful character. She's really robust. She is hugely popular in the kind of diplomatic circles in the US. She's very in with the Trump team. And she is the sort of person who could smooth the way between the Labour government and the Trump administration.
Watch this space. So in other sort of new appointments, obviously not quite as sort of world-defining as Donald Trump, but the Tories finally have a new leader.
Yeah, Kemi Badenoch is the new Conservative leader, the first black woman to lead a party, I think actually anywhere in Europe, which is quite a thing, although Kemi herself will not make a thing of it, so she is not into making a song and dance about those kind of things. Obviously, though, big appointment for the Conservative Party, big news for the Conservative Party. They want somebody who can take on Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage, and they obviously decided she was the one to do that. Robert Jenrick acquitted himself well. He came about 10,000 votes behind her, which was respectable, and he now has a job in her shadow cabinet. So I think that, and she also appointed Mel Stride, who was a leadership contender as well, to be her shadow chancellor. Priti Patel is
delighted.
Priti Patel is going to be great. She's the new shadow foreign secretary, and I think Priti Patel versus David Lammy is going to be must watch. Commons clashes. I think that's going to be great. So I think that will be fun. But yeah, Kemi Badenoch herself, she debuted at PMQs this week. It was the first time up against Keir Starmer, and it was quite a punchy session. I think we've got quite a lot of potential in this in the months to come. She went straight in there, all guns blazing, about Labour's record on Donald Trump, all the things they've said that are bad. Try to get a bit of information about what went on at that dinner. Did Keir Starmer apologise to Trump for all these terrible things? Didn't get an answer, unsurprisingly. And so I thought it was a strong start from her. And actually, Keir Starmer, he was quite punchy back. So I think he decided that the only way to take on Kemi is to fight back. So this could be quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be more interesting than the Starmer-Sunak PMQs.
Yeah.
Pretty dire.
Yes.
So yeah, no, it was definitely punchy.
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting that she chose to go in on the David Lammy comments about Donald Trump that we spoke about earlier. It was interesting in the kind of briefing we did afterwards with her spokesman, where all the journalists kind of come out and they sort of ask questions of the Prime Minister's spokesman and then the opposition party afterwards. So we've not had one yet, obviously, with this new team. And her spokesman was immediately asked loads of questions of why, if Kemi loves free speech, is she like having a go about old tweets? And also she doesn't like what they call offence archaeology when it's her own tweets, but when it's David Lammy, it's fine. So that was quite fun. And then also I enjoyed the bit as well where she claimed that there was nothing about defence in the budget, which was just demonstrably untrue. So we then had a long exchange with her spokesman afterwards about why she'd said that. So I think, sign of things to come, maybe.
I think she's going to be very newsy. And, for a pair of journalists, I'm sure we're both very pleased about that. But yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating. And the big thing she's got to do is obviously unite the party. Obviously, there's some big beasts who have chosen to not be part of that team, and that leaves her with quite a small number of people to pick. There's quite a few junior shadow roles that have to be filled, and trying to keep everybody on side is going to be quite a big task, but strong start, so let's see what happens.
So, Sam, it's your last episode and your last week in the lobby after, I won't ask you how many years, but, it's been a few. I've been here nearly 8, so you've been here a bit longer.
A little bit longer, yeah.
How's it changed? What are your memories of the sort of last few years of reporting from Parliament?
Well, you'd be able to carbon date me anyway. If you go back and check what I'm about to tell you, you'll be able to work out quite how long I've been there. It's a very long time. When I remember I came down from, I was working in Liverpool on the Daily Post and Liverpool Echo at the time, and came down to London, packed up the car and drove down to London, started this new job, and I had no idea what it was going to be like, and it was just a very bizarre world to enter. But I immediately knew I'd love it. It was just so odd. And I thought, yeah, this is the place for me.
Weirdos unite in Westminster.
And I arrived, and there's, for people who don't know, the press gallery it's a corridor with a series of offices off it for each national newspaper, for newswires. I arrived as part. I was working for the regional press at the time, so I was doing lobby coverage for a number of papers, including the Belfast Telegraph, and you basically, I was this little kind of regional reporter, and I was sitting, sharing an office with really big beasts, people who were on the telly all the time, famous people, big writers. And that's the joy, actually, of the press gallery. Everybody kind of is mixed in together. And it was just fascinating. So I arrived there was a bar in the press gallery. It had its own bar. On my second day, regional colleagues said to me, we've got a briefing with a minister and come along. And the briefing was in the bar and people were smoking, this is how long ago it was. And the minister turned up and the special advisor turned up and she was only wearing a shirt. And I thought, this is a very odd way to do business. But anyway, she was
only wearing a shirt.
Only wearing a shirt as a dress. She was quite small. Smoking a fag. He gave us a briefing. We all went off and typed it up. And I thought, I've never done journalism like this before, but I'm going to love this. And it was just a very odd but fun place to be. the bar eventually was removed.
I was going to say, if our editors are listening, there
Yeah.
is no
There
longer
is no
a
bar.
bar in
There
the
hasn't
press
been for a long
gallery.
time.
There are plenty of bars in Parliament,
Yeah,
but there
but
isn't
not
one
in the
right
press
by my
gallery.
desk.
But yeah, the bar was eventually removed, and that was turned into an office, which became known as the Old Bar. And yeah, so things slightly, the kind of the drinking there was a big drinking culture when I arrived, but it started to kind of fall off a little bit. We used to have our own restaurant as well, with restaurant service, and you'd go in there for long lunches. Long lunches were a big part of the lobby at that point. People would often be away for 3 hours. They'd drink lots of bottles. A 2-bottle lunch was a good lunch, and a 3-bottle one was
A really good
you were getting into trouble. And yeah, so it was a very kind of boozy culture, and it was very long late hours, but it was great fun. It was really fascinating. You got to meet lots of interesting people. It was great. This will illustrate that the technology side of it has been it's just unrecognisable. So when I arrived, obviously people did have mobile phones, but actually that wasn't really how you communicated with people. So you would get that we had a tannoy system. Each office had a tannoy, and if a minister or a special advisor wanted to contact somebody, they would, or an MP, anybody who wanted to speak to a journalist, they would ring and through to the telephonist, and they would announce on the tannoy, Sam Lister, so-and-so MP wants to speak to you on 347, and you'd then ring on the internal line and get hold of them. So everybody knew who you were speaking to. You couldn't really have secrets in that respect.
Not good for source protection.
It was not good for source protection, but it was very intriguing to know who was talking to who. And
I'd never get anything done if I was sat there being like, why is so-and-so
yeah,
ringing the Sun?
exactly. Yeah, it was fascinating. So obviously then, and there was no Twitter, there was no... no social media as such, so that obviously the big changes now. So it went from like people ringing through to offices on the tannoy to obviously now everybody just does everything on WhatsApp. I mean, the whole operation now is just on WhatsApp, really, isn't it? Nobody actually speaks to each other really by phone. But obviously, it was fun. It was quite gregarious. There were lots of big characters. The drinking culture's definitely dropped off. I think when I realised, wow, there's a whole new generation of reporters here who just do things in a very different way, was they don't go to the bars at night. Instead, they go jogging together.
Yeah.
And I thought that is a sign of the time. So it's not a bad thing, but it's, definitely not my thing. So
No, certainly. I've been invited on these jogs and I have never been. So that'll tell you everything you need to know. Which was your favourite Prime Minister to cover? It doesn't have to be what your views were on their politics, but who was the most fun?
Oh, it was obviously just Boris. I mean, it was just, nothing to do with the politics, just to do with him. He was fun to cover. I covered him, actually. I spent a lot of time travelling with him when he was London Mayor. I went to Japan with him and to America, and he knew how to deliver for journalists, and that always makes it a pleasure. It was much harder with Theresa May, who I think was a good woman, but I spent a lot of time covering her election campaign, and actually that was
pretty tough going.
It was tough going because she was always worried about making a mistake, which meant she was just always on edge, and she just didn't really ever relax into dealing with journalists very well. So, but yeah, Boris was great fun to cover. He would always get up to mischief to make sure that we had what we needed to get him on the front page the next day, which was always great. But yeah, it's been, I have had a great time. It's been absolutely fascinating seeing all these different prime ministers and how they operate, and all the different little tribes that come with them, all the divisions, each party has them, they all fall out in the end. It's obviously, from my point of view, fascinating to watch that and write it up, and I will miss it greatly, but it's time to move on, and I'm looking forward to my new job. So,
well, we'll miss you, but we'll wish you well from afar. And if we've got any aspiring lobby journalists listening, have you got any pearls of wisdom?
Just be nice to everybody, because nobody ever really leaves Westminster.
That's so true.
They come back. You think they've gone, and they come back even more powerful or in bigger jobs, So, yeah, just be nice to everybody.
Message for life.
Anyway, on my final edition of this podcast, I'd like to know your moment of the week, Lizzie.
Oh, goodness. It's been quite a week. I think mine's a silly one, but I very much enjoyed Nigel Farage in Florida saying magnanimously that he would rule out any ambassadorial roles because of his close relationship with Donald Trump, because I don't think anyone's offered him one. But that made me laugh a lot. How about you?
Oh, well, I just think it was Kemi Badenoch at PMQs. I just thought after the long and drawn out process, it was good to finally see a new leader in there and setting the tone of things to come. So I just thought that was a good moment.
And that's it for this week. You've been listening to The Division Bell.
Bye for now.